Welcome back to another Sensei series. Today we're looking at 5 tips that might not yield immediate results, but in the long run will pay off in dividends for your soloing. Now I want to look at things that might not seem so obvious at first. While working on the fundamentals like ear training, theory, and technique are crucial, that's not what we're discussing today. Okay, 5 tips that will greatly improve your soloing over time. Tip number 1, lift solos. This is a pretty straightforward concept, but requires a fair amount of effort. It's also great because it improves your musicality in a number of different ways. What you want to do is take a solo that you really enjoy, learn to play it note for note, perfectly, from memory, using your ear. If you've never done this before, don't start off with something extremely complicated. Lift an easier solo and work up to the harder ones. So here's why you want to do this. It does wonders for our ears, and as musicians, those are our most important assets. It also helps us develop our musical vocabulary. When learning to play a solo perfectly, it means that you have to listen to it over and over and over again, as well as play it over and over. Doing this allows the licks and subtleties of the solo to seep into our musical subconscious, which we can later draw on when we're improvising our own solos. The more solos we lift, the more rich our musical vocabulary becomes. I would encourage you to do your best not to cheat and use tabs, even if it means you have to use some musical software like the amazing Slower Downer or Transcribe to help you learn these solos. Tip number 2, see the guitar neck in chord tones. Many people have different ways they conceptualize guitar. There are a lot of different places to put your fingers, so we need some sort of system to make sense of it all. For me, I used to see the guitar neck in scales. At first, I would use pentatonic scales. If a song was in the key of A, I would use the A pentatonic scale and its inversions as the framework for my solos. I then learned to see the guitar in major scales and the inversions up and down the neck, also known as modes. If this is going above your head, that's okay. This is a fairly advanced topic that does require some musical theory. If all this is foreign to you, I would encourage you to come back to this tip once you've spent some time working at the scales on guitar. You'll probably find the next tips more useful, so I'm going to toss up a link so you can skip ahead right now. For those of you still with me, let's carry on. Using modes as a roadmap works pretty well, but what took my playing to the next level was when I went through all those modes and figured out how every note related to every chord in a respective key. For example, if I'm in the key of G and I'm in the open position, I know that the notes available to me look like this. The Aeolian mode. Let's look at how those notes relate to a G chord first of all. This is the major 6th, this is the major 7th, this is the root, and so on. Now what happens if the chord changes to an A minor? Each one of these notes takes on a new relation to the new chord. This note is the 5th, major 6th, minor 7th, and so on. Again, this is a fairly advanced concept and does require some musical theory. Now what you want to do is figure this out for every chord and every mode in every key. That's a lot of work, but don't be too discouraged because once you've done one key, the rest become easier. All you need to do is take those same shapes and move them up and down the fretboard. Why is this so important? If I know which notes are part of the underlying chord, I can highlight those notes in my solo, which makes it sound like I'm playing the changes. Here's a quick example of a solo in a simple progression in the key of A without thinking about chord tones. Not the worst thing in the world, but now let's look at a solo that does highlight those chord tones. To me, it just sounds more mature. Here's another cool thing you can do. By highlighting the chord tones, you can mess around with the notes that are in between. This can really jazz up our solos by playing wrong notes that are grounded by those chord tones. Here's an example. To me, that sounds pretty cool. It takes a long time to implement this new mindset, but trust me, it really pays off. Tip number 3, practice with a looper. This is one of the best practice tools out there. A looper records you playing and then plays it back to you over and over and over again in a continuous loop. This pedal allows us to practice along with something, so we can apply what we learn in a more practical setting. If you're working on soloing over a certain song, you can record that chord progression and be jamming along with it instantly. Another nice thing that loopers allow you to do is overdub your solos over your pre-existing loop. Of course, you could do this with recording software, but this is way more efficient. Recording yourself and critiquing is crucial. There's so many things you'll pick up on a playback that you wouldn't pick up on when you're playing in the first place. You wouldn't get ready for a hot date unless you looked in the mirror. Same concept. Looping pedals aren't extremely expensive, and if you spend some time practicing with one, it's really going to pay off. Tip number 4, study your musical heritage. I've always been of the theory that if you want to learn to play like your favorite musicians, then you should study the music that they listen to. Let's say you want to play like Stevie Ray Vaughan, which when I was 15 was my goal in life. So a big part of learning Stevie's style is lifting his solos. See tip 1. An equally big part of learning his style is studying his influences. Guys like Eric Clapton, Buddy Guy, Jimi Hendrix, Albert King, B.B. King, the list goes on. You can then take it a step further, study the players that influenced those guys. Robert Johnson, Son House, Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters to name a few. By doing this, you'll have a much richer understanding of the blues than if you studied one musician or one generation of musicians. And in my mind, that allows you to evolve into your own type of guitarist that's drawn from a long line of musical history instead of becoming just another Stevie Ray Vaughan clone. Of course, the blues is just one example. There are long musical family trees in every genre. By understanding your musical roots, it will only add maturity to your playing. Final tip, number 5. Stretch before you play. It's an easy thing to do that's often neglected, which can lead to some really negative results in the long run. Before you sit down to play guitar, put on some music that inspires you and spend 3 minutes stretching. I like the idea of moving kinetic stretches at first, allowing the muscles to get a bit warmed up before going to some deeper static stretches. Think of it like this: if you have a stick of gum that you start stretching around right away, it's going to break in half. But if you slowly start warming it up and moving it around, it's going to be able to bend like crazy. The same concept applies to your muscles. Get in the habit of stretching, because your soloing is not going to sound great if your joints are all totally f***ed. And that's that. 5 tips that will greatly improve your soloing over time. I hope you found this information useful, and don't feel discouraged if you feel a little bit overwhelmed. Music is a never-ending lifelong journey that you gradually figure out more and more over time. To let me know you've made it all the way to the end of this video, why don't you leave me a comment letting me know what your long-term musical goals are. Even if you're not a musician and you still watch this video, maybe your goals are to discover new music, learn to play an instrument, whatever. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. I make a wide range of musical content here, so please stay tuned and hit that subscribe button. Guys, I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'll see you again soon.